Some brides disappear. Others are erased. And sometimes, the truth waits inside the dress they never got to wear. I never believed old wedding gowns could keep secrets. They were just silk, lace, satin, and faded memories stitched together by people who once believed forever could be measured in promises. That was what I told myself every morning when I unlocked the narrow brick storefront on West 28th Street in Manhattan, switched on the antique chandelier above my work table, and slipped on a pair of white cotton gloves. At 27, restoring historic bridal gowns wasn't exactly the career little girls dreamed about, but I loved the quiet honesty of it. Fabric never lied. It wrinkled. It yellowed. It carried perfume that survived decades. It remembered tears no one else could see. People forgot. Dresses didn't. The shipment arrived on a rainy Thursday just after 9. The delivery driver struggled to wheel the oversized wooden crate through the front door before asking me to sign 3 separate forms. No return address. No client name. Only a typed instruction attached to the lid. Restore before October 14th. Handle with extreme care. I frowned. Wealthy collectors usually loved putting their names on everything. Anonymous clients almost always came with unusual stories, and unusual stories usually meant unusual paychecks. I pried the crate open with a crowbar, expecting another Victorian masterpiece wrapped in acid-free paper. Instead, I found a single ivory gown resting inside layers of linen, untouched by time in ways that didn't make sense. The satin still reflected the morning light. Tiny seed pearls traced delicate vines across the bodice. The sleeves were elegant without being extravagant, and the cathedral train flowed like frozen water beneath my fingertips. It should have looked 50 years old. It looked as though someone had finished sewing it yesterday. A faint scent drifted upward. Not perfume exactly. Orange blossoms. Cedarwood. Rain. My grandmother used to say memories had fragrances long after faces disappeared. I smiled despite myself before carefully lifting the gown onto the mannequin standing beneath the studio window. That's when I noticed the damage. A narrow tear hidden beneath the left side of the skirt. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Strange. The rest of the gown was flawless. Whoever owned this dress hadn't worn it long enough to leave a single stain. I reached for my magnifying lamp and gently turned the fabric inside out. Restoration wasn't glamorous. It was patience measured one stitch at a time. My fingers traced the lining until they caught something unusual. Another layer. Someone had sewn an extra strip of silk inside the hem by hand. Not professionally. Secretly. My pulse slowed. I fetched my smallest seam ripper and loosened the nearly invisible stitches one by one, careful not to damage the surrounding fabric. The hidden pocket opened no wider than 3 inches. Folded inside rested a yellowed photograph no larger than a playing card. I unfolded it carefully. A bride stood beneath an old stone church, smiling toward someone outside the frame. The photograph had been burned along one edge, leaving only half her face untouched. It was enough. My hand froze above the table. My breath disappeared somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Because the woman staring back at me wasn't someone who merely resembled me. She had my eyes. My smile. The same tiny scar beneath my chin I'd carried since I fell off my bicycle when I was 8. Even the loose strand of blonde hair escaping beside her cheek looked exactly the way mine did whenever humidity filled the air. I whispered the only words my mind could find. "Who are you?" The room remained silent. Outside, rain tapped softly against the front window. Somewhere in the city, a church bell rang 10 slow times. Then my phone vibrated across the work table. Unknown number. One new message. It contained only 7 words. She was never supposed to be remembered. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed and my own reflection replaced the words. She was never supposed to be remembered. 7 simple words. No signature. No explanation. Just enough to make the tiny hairs on the back of my neck rise. I looked from the photograph to the wedding gown standing quietly beneath the morning light. Whoever had hidden that picture had wanted someone to find it one day. The question was, why me? I tried calling the number. It did not exist. I sent a text asking who they were. The message failed instantly. It was as though the conversation had vanished the moment it reached me. I should have called the police. I should have contacted the museum association that occasionally hired my restoration studio. Instead, I slipped the photograph into an archival sleeve and locked it inside my desk drawer. Something inside me resisted letting anyone else see it. It felt irrational, almost protective, like the picture belonged with me even though I had never seen it before today. The rain continued for most of the afternoon. Customers came and went with vintage veils and family heirlooms needing repairs, but my thoughts never drifted far from the gown. Every few minutes I found myself looking toward the mannequin as though expecting it to move. Closing time finally arrived. I switched off every light except the one above my work table before gathering my bag. My phone buzzed again. This time the message came from the Manhattan Historical Society. The anonymous client had accepted an invitation to display the restored gown during the Blackwood Foundation charity gala the following evening. Attendance by the restoration specialist was required. I almost declined. Charity galas were filled with people who wore confidence as naturally as expensive watches. I preferred quiet workshops to crowded ballrooms. Still, the restoration contract was generous, and professional opportunities like this rarely came twice. The following evening, I arrived at the Grand Lexington Hotel carrying the carefully protected gown in a climate-controlled garment case. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light across polished marble floors while a string quartet played near the sweeping staircase. Men in tailored tuxedos exchanged business cards over glasses of sparkling water. Women greeted one another with polished smiles that somehow never disturbed their perfect lipstick. I felt wonderfully invisible in my simple navy dress. That illusion lasted exactly 4 minutes. A curator approached with an apologetic smile. One of our scheduled models canceled because of a family emergency. You have the correct measurements. Would you mind wearing the gown for the unveiling? I laughed, assuming she was joking. She was not. 20 minutes later I stood before a full-length mirror inside a private dressing suite while an assistant fastened the final pearl button behind my neck. The dress settled around me with impossible precision. Not close enough. Exact. Every seam rested where it should. Every sleeve fit without alteration. It felt less like wearing someone else's gown and more like remembering my own reflection. When I stepped into the ballroom, conversations softened one after another until only the music remained. Hundreds of strangers turned toward me. I lowered my eyes, wishing the evening would end before it had truly begun. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of crystal striking marble. A wine glass had slipped from someone's hand. I looked up. Across the ballroom stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his steel blue eyes locked on mine with an expression that looked nothing like surprise. It looked like grief returning after years of waiting. No one beside him dared speak. No one moved. Without breaking eye contact, he whispered a single name that was not mine. Evelyn. The name echoed through the ballroom long after his lips stopped moving. Evelyn. I had never heard it before, yet something about the way he said it settled heavily in my chest. It was not spoken with surprise alone. It carried years of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and hope that had survived long after reason should have buried it. Every conversation around us faded into uneasy silence. The musicians continued playing, but even their melody seemed quieter somehow. The man standing across the room never looked away from me. He was taller than anyone surrounding him, composed in a way that suggested control had become second nature. Dark hair framed a face marked by confidence rather than arrogance, yet his eyes betrayed something entirely different. They looked like someone staring at a miracle he no longer trusted himself to believe. A woman beside me whispered, "That is Adrian Blackwood." The name meant little to me beyond newspaper headlines about philanthropy, historic preservation, and one of New York's most influential business families. I had expected confidence from a man like that. I had not expected heartbreak. Adrian took one slow step forward. Then another. The crowd instinctively parted without anyone asking them to. No security guards rushed ahead. No assistants interrupted him. It was as though the room itself understood this moment belonged to him. I reminded myself to breathe. My palms had become damp beneath the delicate lace gloves. When he finally stopped a few feet away, neither of us spoke immediately. His gaze traveled carefully across the dress, lingering on the embroidered pearls before lifting back to my face. He studied me with impossible precision, not as though admiring a stranger, but searching for something almost lost to memory. "May I ask you a question?" he said quietly. His voice was calm, rich, almost gentle. I nodded because somehow words refused to cooperate. "Where did you find this gown?" I swallowed before answering. "It arrived anonymously at my restoration studio yesterday morning. I was hired to restore it." His expression changed only slightly, but I noticed it. A flicker of disbelief. A shadow of concern. "And before yesterday?" he asked. "Had you ever seen it?" "Never." He looked relieved for only a fraction of a second before another emotion replaced it. Doubt. "Did anything else come with it?" My heartbeat quickened. The photograph hidden inside the hem flashed through my thoughts. So did the mysterious message on my phone. Instinct told me not to reveal either one. I had no explanation for that instinct. It simply arrived as naturally as breathing. "No," I answered softly. The lie felt strangely heavy. Adrian watched me for several silent seconds. He did not accuse me. He did not challenge my answer. Instead, he tilted his head ever so slightly, almost studying the tiny scar beneath my chin. I resisted the urge to touch it. "You have that scar," he murmured, almost to himself. "Excuse me?" His attention snapped back to my eyes. "Nothing." Around us, conversations cautiously resumed, though dozens of curious glances still drifted our way. I became painfully aware of standing in the center of a room filled with strangers. "I should return the gown after the presentation," I said, hoping to escape whatever invisible current had trapped us. Adrian gave a small nod. "You should." He paused before adding, "But I do not believe this evening is the beginning of our story." A chill slipped across my shoulders despite the warmth of the ballroom. Before I could respond, an elderly woman approached carrying a silver guest registry bound in dark leather. She smiled politely and asked me to sign beside the display as part of the exhibition record. I accepted the pen without thinking. The instant I wrote Claire Bennett across the page, the woman's smile disappeared. Her eyes widened. She turned the registry toward herself, then slowly looked back at me. Barely above a whisper, she said, "That cannot be possible. This signature, it matches hers exactly." The elderly woman's fingers tightened around the leather guest registry as though it had suddenly become fragile. She looked from my signature to my face, then back again, her composure slipping just enough for me to notice. "I am sorry," she said, forcing a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I must have imagined it." Before I could ask what she meant, she carefully closed the book against her chest and walked away much faster than someone her age normally would. I watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling the same quiet uneasiness that had followed me since opening the anonymous crate. Adrian noticed it too. "Mrs. Whitmore has been preserving historical documents for nearly 40 years, he said. "She does not startle easily." "Then why did she look at me like that?" I asked. He hesitated. It was only a second, but long enough to tell me he was choosing his words with unusual care. "Because she has seen that handwriting before." My pulse quickened. "That is impossible." "Perhaps." His answer carried no certainty. "Would you walk with me?" Every reasonable instinct told me to decline. Instead, I found myself following him away from the ballroom toward a quieter gallery overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of city lights beneath the steady rhythm of rain. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt strangely comfortable, as though the room itself expected patience before answers. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the marble railing without taking his eyes off the skyline. 20 years ago, he said quietly, there was supposed to be a wedding. I waited. The ceremony never happened. His voice remained calm, but every word sounded carefully measured. The bride disappeared less than 24 hours before she was meant to walk down the aisle. I frowned. Disappeared? That was the official story. He gave a faint, humorless smile. The newspapers called it a tragic mystery. The city moved on within weeks. Most people forgot her name before the flowers outside the church had faded. The rain tapped gently against the glass behind us. You did not, I said. No. His answer came without hesitation. Some people cannot be replaced by memories. I looked down at the gown wrapped around me. Suddenly it felt heavier than silk should. Was this her dress? Adrian slowly nodded. It was custom-made in Italy. There has never been another like it. My fingers brushed the embroidered pearls across the sleeve. Then how did it end up in my studio? That is the question I have been asking myself since I saw you wearing it. He finally turned toward me. There was no suspicion in his eyes now. Only determination. After she vanished, every photograph, every personal letter, every public record connected to her began disappearing one by one. At first we believed it was coincidence. Then we realized someone wanted the world to forget she had ever existed. A chill settled over me despite the warmth inside the gallery. The anonymous text flashed through my thoughts again. She was never supposed to be remembered. My throat tightened. What was her name? Adrian held my gaze for several silent seconds before answering. Evelyn Carter. The name meant nothing to me, yet an unexpected ache stirred somewhere deep inside my chest. Before I could ask another question, my phone vibrated inside my evening bag. Unknown number. One new message. I unlocked the screen with trembling fingers. There were only 6 words this time. Stop asking questions. They are watching you. My fingers tightened around my phone until the edges pressed into my palm. Stop asking questions. They are watching you. I read the message 3 times before looking over my shoulder. The gallery was quiet except for the distant sound of conversation drifting from the ballroom. Guests laughed softly beneath the music. Waiters carried silver trays between marble columns. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet for the first time that evening, I felt as though invisible eyes had followed every step I had taken since opening that wooden crate. Is something wrong? Adrian asked. I turned the screen toward him. He read the message without changing his expression, but something in his posture became noticeably more alert. Did you receive the earlier message from the same number? He asked. I nodded. It said she was never supposed to be remembered. He remained silent for several seconds before quietly handing the phone back to me. Do not delete either message. Who keeps sending them? I do not know. His answer sounded honest, which somehow worried me even more. I had expected a man with his influence to have explanations. Instead, every answer seemed to uncover another mystery. The evening ended politely enough. Guests applauded the historical exhibition, photographers captured elegant smiles beneath crystal chandeliers, and the restored gown received admiration from people who knew nothing about the photograph hidden inside its hem. Before leaving, I carefully changed back into my navy dress and packed the gown inside its protective garment case. Adrian walked me to the hotel's private entrance where the rain had finally stopped. The streets shimmered beneath reflections of yellow streetlights. A black sedan waited quietly at the curb. Allow my driver to take you home, he said. That is not necessary. Perhaps not. But I would sleep better knowing you arrived safely. I almost refused again. Instead, I accepted. The drive across Manhattan felt strangely peaceful. The driver never attempted conversation. Jazz played softly through the speakers while city lights drifted across the windows like moving stars. I reached my apartment building just before midnight. The driver waited until I unlocked the front entrance before pulling away. Inside my apartment, everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. My favorite ceramic mug rested beside the sink. A stack of restoration journals covered the coffee table. The familiar quiet should have comforted me. It did not. I walked directly to my desk and removed the old photograph from its archival sleeve. Under the brighter apartment light, new details emerged. The bride's bouquet contained white gardenias. Behind her stood the stone archway of a church whose stained glass window formed an unusual compass rose. I knew that design. I had restored sketches of it only months earlier for a preservation society. St. Bartholomew Chapel in the Hudson Valley. My heartbeat quickened. The photograph suddenly belonged to a real place instead of an impossible mystery. Before I could search for the chapel online, my laptop chimed with a new email. There was no subject line. No sender name. Only one attachment labeled Claire Bennett. Confused, I opened the file. It was not spam. It was my life. My elementary school photograph. My college transcripts. My apartment lease. Copies of my driver's license. Every address I had ever lived at. Every job I had ever worked. Someone had assembled my entire history into a single folder. At the bottom appeared one sentence typed in plain black letters. Adrian Blackwood was not the first person to start looking for you. He was only the latest. Sleep never came that night. I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise with my laptop open, the anonymous email glowing against the darkness of my apartment. Every document inside the folder was real. Every date matched my memory. Every address belonged to a place I had once called home. Yet the deeper I looked, the stranger everything became. The earliest records stopped abruptly before my 8th birthday. There were school report cards beginning in 3rd grade. Medical forms from a pediatric clinic in Connecticut. A library card application signed by my adoptive parents. But nothing before that. No hospital photograph. No kindergarten enrollment. No vaccination records from infancy. It was as though my life had quietly appeared one ordinary Tuesday when I was 8 years old. I pulled my own birth certificate from the small fireproof box inside my bedroom closet. I had never questioned it before. Why would I? My parents had always been loving, practical people who believed birthdays should be celebrated with homemade cake instead of expensive presents. They had never given me a reason to doubt anything. Still, something felt different now. I held the certificate beside the digital copy from the anonymous email. They matched perfectly except for one tiny detail I had never noticed. The county seal looked slightly blurred, almost as though it had been copied from another document years ago. I told myself I was imagining things. Lack of sleep could make anyone suspicious. By 8 o'clock that morning, I found myself driving north toward the municipal records office listed on the certificate. The courthouse stood exactly where the document claimed it should, a quiet brick building with white columns and neatly trimmed hedges. An elderly clerk greeted me with a warm smile and asked how she could help. I explained that I was researching family records and handed her the certificate. She disappeared into the archive room while I waited beneath the steady ticking of an old wall clock. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. When she returned, the smile had vanished from her face. "Miss Bennett," she said gently, "would you mind coming with me?" She led me into a small office where another employee sat before a computer. He rotated the monitor toward me. The official database displayed my birth certificate number. The space where my name should have appeared was blank. "That cannot be right," I whispered. The clerk adjusted her glasses and searched again using my date of birth. Again, nothing. She searched by hospital. Nothing. By my parents' names. Nothing. Finally she folded her hands together and looked at me with quiet sympathy. "I do not know how to explain this," she said. The certificate number exists, but the original record does not. According to our archives, it was removed from the system more than 19 years ago under a judicial authorization. Removed? I repeated. Vital records are almost never deleted, the man beside her said carefully. They can be corrected or amended, but complete removal is extraordinarily rare. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Who authorized it? He clicked through several additional screens before stopping. His expression changed instantly. I am sorry. What is it? The authorization has been sealed. Before I could ask another question, my phone rang. Adrian. I answered immediately. Claire, he said, his normally steady voice carrying an urgency I had not heard before. Leave the courthouse now. Do not ask anyone else about your birth records. I froze. How did you know where I am? There was a brief silence. Then he answered with words that made the room seem suddenly smaller. Because someone accessed your file exactly 3 minutes before you did. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. Who accessed my file? I asked, forcing the words past the knot in my throat. I do not know yet, Adrian replied. But whoever it was knew exactly where to look. Claire, listen to me carefully. Walk out of the courthouse through the front entrance. Do not stop. Do not answer questions. I will meet you there. The call ended before I could protest. The clerk watched me with quiet concern. Is everything all right? She asked. I managed a polite smile that convinced neither of us. I think so. I thanked both employees for their time, slipped my birth certificate back into my bag, and walked toward the front doors. Every footstep echoed across the polished marble floor. Outside, the autumn air felt unusually cool. Fallen maple leaves drifted across the courthouse steps while families crossed the town square carrying coffee cups and grocery bags. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. That was what frightened me most. I scanned the street without really knowing what I was searching for. A man reading a newspaper on a nearby bench. A woman walking her golden retriever. A delivery truck unloading packages across the street. None of them seemed interested in me, yet I could not shake the feeling that someone had already seen me long before I arrived. A black sedan rolled quietly to the curb. Adrian stepped out before the driver had fully stopped. He wore a charcoal overcoat instead of the tailored tuxedo from the gala, making him look less like the city's most influential businessman and more like someone who had driven through the night without caring how exhausted he appeared. His eyes found mine immediately. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded. I think so. He searched my face for another moment before gently opening the passenger door. Come with me. There is something you need to see. The drive lasted nearly 90 minutes. We left the busy highways behind and followed winding roads lined with towering oak trees whose leaves had begun turning shades of gold and crimson. Neither of us spoke very much. The silence felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Finally, the road curved toward an old stone chapel resting on a hillside above the Hudson River. My breath caught. I recognized the building before the car even stopped. The stained glass window above the entrance formed the same compass rose I had seen in the hidden photograph. St. Bartholomew Chapel, I whispered. Adrian looked at me with quiet surprise. You have been here before? No. I stared at the weathered stone walls. But I knew what it was the moment I saw it. He unlocked the heavy wooden doors with an old brass key. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight as we stepped inside. The chapel smelled faintly of cedar and candle wax. Time seemed slower here. Peaceful. Untouched. Adrian led me toward the front pew where a small wooden chest rested beneath the stained glass window. He lifted the lid with remarkable care. Inside lay a single velvet box, faded by age but perfectly preserved. This belonged to Evelyn, he said softly. He handed it to me without hesitation. I opened the lid. Resting inside was an elegant platinum wedding ring engraved with tiny compass roses circling the band. My heart skipped. I had seen that design before. Not in the chapel. Not in the photograph. My hands moved instinctively toward the anonymous wedding gown folded inside its garment bag beside us. I reached into the hidden pocket beneath the hem where the photograph had been concealed. My fingertips brushed against something I had somehow missed during the restoration. Slowly, I pulled out a second ring. It was identical in every detail except for one thing. Inside the band, barely visible beneath decades of silence, 4 words had been engraved. For Claire. When she remembers. The engraving blurred as my eyes filled with questions I could not answer. For Claire. When she remembers. I read the words again, tracing each letter with the tip of my finger as though touching them might unlock whatever part of my past had gone missing. Adrian remained completely still beside me. He was watching my face instead of the ring, searching for any sign that something had returned. "You have never seen that before?" he asked quietly. I slowly shook my head. "No. But it feels as though I was supposed to." My own answer unsettled me. Feelings were not evidence. They were not history. Yet standing inside the silent chapel, surrounded by weathered stone and colored light pouring through the stained glass, certainty no longer came from documents or records. It came from moments that refused to explain themselves. Adrian carefully closed the velvet box containing Evelyn's ring and placed it back inside the wooden chest. "Someone wanted you to find the second ring," he said. "It was hidden too carefully to be accidental." "Then why hide it at all?" I asked. He looked toward the altar where fresh white lilies rested inside a crystal vase. "Perhaps because the wrong people were searching for it." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown sender. "Do not leave the chapel through the front entrance." My pulse jumped. I looked up immediately. It happened again. Adrian read the screen without speaking. His expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. "There is another exit," he said. "Follow me." He led me through a narrow hallway behind the sanctuary that opened into a small library filled with shelves of aging church records. Dust floated lazily through the afternoon sunlight. Leather-bound parish books lined the walls beside framed wedding photographs dating back decades. Everything smelled of old paper and cedar. At the far end of the room stood an elderly priest arranging hymnals. He looked up the moment we entered. Recognition crossed his face before surprise did. "Adrian," he said warmly. "It has been many years." Then his eyes settled on me. The smile disappeared. His hands loosened around the stack of books until one slipped gently onto the wooden table. "Dear Lord," he whispered. "It cannot be." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "Have we met?" He walked closer with careful, almost hesitant steps. "No," he answered softly. "But I baptized a little girl in this chapel 20 years ago." My breathing slowed. "What was her name?" He searched my face for several long seconds. The record was sealed before anyone could read it again. He turned toward an old filing cabinet tucked beneath the window and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small brass key hanging from his belt. Inside rested a thick parish register wrapped in faded blue cloth. He opened it carefully to a page marked with a pressed white flower. Half the page had been removed long ago. Only the bottom corner remained. There, written in elegant blue ink, were 3 words that time had somehow spared. Claire Evelyn Carter. The room became perfectly silent. My vision narrowed until those 3 words were all I could see. Claire. Evelyn. Carter. Not Bennett. Never Bennett. Somewhere outside, a church bell rang across the valley. At the exact same moment, Adrian's phone began ringing. He glanced at the caller identification, and for the first time since I had met him, genuine concern crossed his face. He answered immediately. He listened without saying a word. Then he slowly lowered the phone and looked directly at me. "Someone broke into your apartment less than 10 minutes ago. They searched everything except one place. Your restoration studio." They know the gown is no longer there. The words settled over the chapel like winter air. They know the gown is no longer there. I looked instinctively toward the garment bag resting beside the wooden chest. Until that moment, I had believed the dress was simply the beginning of an old mystery. Now it felt like the center of one that had never truly ended. Adrian thanked the priest quietly before lifting the garment bag over his shoulder. The elderly man reached into the drawer once more and removed the pressed white flower that had marked the damaged parish register. "Take this," he said, placing it carefully into my hand. It was pressed between these pages the day that little girl was blessed. I always wondered why I could never throw it away. The flower was impossibly delicate, its petals nearly transparent after so many years. I slipped it inside my wallet without fully understanding why it mattered. Some things simply felt too important to leave behind. We exited through a narrow stone passage that opened behind the chapel into a grove of towering maple trees. The late afternoon sun painted the leaves in shades of amber and crimson while the Hudson River shimmered below the hillside. Everything looked peaceful, almost untouched by time. Yet I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The feeling of being watched had returned. Adrian opened the passenger door of the sedan, but instead of heading south toward Manhattan, the driver turned onto a private road that wound through dense woodland before climbing toward a sprawling estate hidden beyond iron gates. The house appeared less like a mansion and more like an old family residence that had quietly witnessed generations come and go. Ivy climbed weathered stone walls. Tall windows reflected the fading sky. A fountain stood silent in the circular driveway, surrounded by white roses beginning to bloom despite the cool autumn weather. "Where are we?" I asked. "Blackwood House," Adrian answered. "My family has lived here for nearly 100 years. As we stepped inside, I expected marble grandeur and formal elegance. Instead, I found warmth. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Oil paintings hung beside family photographs. A fire burned gently inside the library, carrying the comforting scent of cedar throughout the room. Nothing about the house felt cold. It felt lived in. Adrian placed the garment bag carefully across an antique sofa before walking toward a large portrait hanging above the fireplace. I followed quietly. The painting showed a young woman wearing an ivory dress beneath soft afternoon light. Her smile carried the same quiet kindness I had noticed in the burned photograph. She was beautiful, but it was not her face that held my attention. Around her neck rested a delicate silver necklace with a tiny compass rose pendant. Without thinking, my hand moved beneath my blouse. I froze. Ever since I was a little girl, I had worn a small silver pendant that my parents told me had been found with me when they adopted me. I had never taken it off. My fingers pulled the necklace into the light. The pendant resting against my palm matched the one in the portrait exactly. Adrian slowly closed his eyes. "I was hoping I was wrong," he whispered. "About what?" He looked at me with an expression that carried relief and sorrow in equal measure. "Because that necklace was never made twice." I could barely breathe. "My parents said it came with me. They were telling the truth." He stepped closer to the portrait. "Evelyn designed it herself." Silence settled between us until Adrian finally spoke again, his voice lower than before. "There is something I have never told another living person. 20 years ago, the world believed I lost the woman I was going to marry. But that is not the secret I have carried all these years." He turned toward me, his eyes unwavering. "The real secret is that she disappeared only hours after placing a frightened little girl into my arms and begging me to make sure no one ever found her." The room seemed to lose all sound. Even the quiet crackle of the fireplace faded beneath the weight of Adrian's confession. I searched his face, hoping I had misunderstood him. "You knew me?" I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. He lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "I knew a little girl who laughed every time she saw snow for the first time each winter. She insisted every white feather drifting through the air was a message from heaven." Something deep inside me stirred. Not a memory exactly. More like the faint outline of one. I closed my eyes, and for a fraction of a second I saw tiny hands reaching toward falling white flakes beneath a gray sky. The image disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. I remember. I stopped myself. No. I almost remembered. Adrian walked to a mahogany cabinet and carefully removed a weathered leather journal tied with a faded blue ribbon. He carried it to the library table and placed it gently between us. "This belonged to Evelyn," he said. "I promised myself I would never open it unless I discovered what truly happened to her." His fingers hesitated above the ribbon before slowly untying it. The pages smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Elegant handwriting filled nearly every page. Some entries described ordinary moments. Coffee on rainy mornings. Walks beside the Hudson River. Plans for a wedding that never came. Then Adrian stopped on a page marked with a pressed maple leaf. His expression changed. He silently turned the journal toward me. I read the words slowly. "If anyone ever finds this, please know that my daughter must never carry the burden of my name until she is old enough to choose it herself. If they cannot find me, they will search for her. If they cannot erase me, they will erase every trace that she ever belonged to me. Protect her memories until remembering becomes safer than forgetting." My eyes refused to leave the page. Daughter. The word echoed through my mind until everything else disappeared. My breathing became uneven. "She had a daughter," I whispered. Adrian nodded. "Yes." "What was her name?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Claire." The library blurred around me. My fingers trembled against the edge of the journal as another fragment surfaced without warning. Warm sunlight. The scent of fresh bread. A woman kneeling in front of me, fastening a silver compass pendant around my neck while smiling through tears. "No matter where life takes you," she whispered, "this will always point you home." My hand flew to the necklace resting against my chest. Tears filled my eyes before I realized they had begun to fall. "I heard that before," I whispered. "Someone said those exact words to me." Adrian remained silent, allowing the memory to settle instead of interrupting it. I opened the journal again, turning the next page almost instinctively. A folded sheet slipped onto the table. It was a map of the Hudson Valley with a small red circle drawn around an abandoned lakeside cottage less than 15 miles from St. Bartholomew Chapel. Beneath the map, Evelyn had written one final sentence in the same graceful handwriting. "If Claire ever remembers the necklace, take her to the lake." That is where the truth began. Before either of us could speak, thunder rolled softly outside the library windows. At that exact moment, every light inside Blackwood House flickered once before the entire room fell into darkness, leaving only the fire glowing against the silence. Darkness settled over the library for only a few seconds, yet it felt much longer. The fire continued to glow inside the stone fireplace, painting soft amber light across the shelves while rain tapped gently against the tall windows. Somewhere deeper inside the house, a backup generator hummed to life. One by one, the lamps flickered back on. Adrian remained exactly where he had been standing, his eyes fixed on the journal lying open before us. "The storm did not cause that," he said quietly. "This house has 3 independent power systems." Before I could ask what he meant, the library door opened. An older gentleman wearing a neatly pressed gray suit stepped inside. His silver hair and calm expression carried the confidence of someone who had spent decades solving problems before they became emergencies. "Everything is secure," he said to Adrian. "The outage was limited to this room." His eyes shifted toward me. "Miss Bennett." Adrian nodded toward him. "This is Samuel Reeves. He has managed my family's affairs since before I was born." The last name caught my attention immediately. Reeves. It was not Bennett. It was not Carter. Yet I knew it. "Reeves," I repeated softly. Samuel lowered his head with quiet understanding. "Your adoptive parents were Daniel and Margaret Bennett. But before the adoption was finalized, they lived for nearly 2 years under temporary legal guardianship arranged by my family." I stared at him in disbelief. Then you knew them? Very well. My heartbeat quickened. Why did they never tell me? Samuel removed a small envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. The paper had yellowed with age, and my name appeared across the front in elegant handwriting. Claire. Nothing more. Because they promised someone they never would, he answered gently. Until today. My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. The seal had never been broken. It felt impossible that something addressed to me had waited 20 years before reaching my hands. Adrian gave a small nod. Open it. Inside rested a single folded letter. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, exactly like Evelyn's journal. I unfolded it carefully. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then the promise we made has finally reached its ending. If your memories have begun to return, do not blame the people who raised you. They loved you enough to become strangers inside your own story. They did not steal your life. They protected it. I had to hide your name because there were people determined to erase every part of our family. I prayed that one day you would remember me not because someone told you who I was, but because your own heart refused to forget. Tears blurred the page. I wiped them away before continuing. If Adrian is standing beside you, then he kept his promise. Trust him the way I did. Everything became still. I slowly lowered the letter and looked toward Adrian. She trusted you with me. He nodded once. She did. A question that had quietly followed me since the gala finally found its voice. Were you my father? Adrian's expression softened with unmistakable sadness. No. He stepped closer, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I loved your mother with everything I had. We were going to build a life together. But I was never your father. My breath caught. Somehow that answer hurt and comforted me at the same time. Adrian continued before I could ask another question. Your father was someone almost no one ever met. That was exactly how he wanted it. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the windows with growing urgency. Samuel quietly reached into the envelope once more. There was one more item. He placed a faded Polaroid photograph beside the letter. It showed Evelyn smiling beside a man whose face had been deliberately cut away from the picture years earlier. Only one small detail remained untouched. Resting in the man's arms was a little girl wearing a tiny silver compass pendant around her neck and looking directly into the camera with bright green eyes that were unmistakably my own. I could not stop looking at the photograph. The little girl smiled with complete innocence, unaware that someone had already begun rewriting her future. My fingertips rested lightly against the faded image, tracing the tiny compass pendant around her neck before moving to the empty space where the man's face had once been. Whoever removed it had done so carefully. Deliberately. Not out of anger. Out of intention. They had wanted the child to remain visible while ensuring no one could ever identify the man holding her. Who cut the photograph? I asked quietly. Samuel answered before Adrian could. We never discovered that. He folded his hands behind his back. When the family archives were finally recovered years later, dozens of photographs had been altered the same way. Faces removed. Names erased. Dates changed. Entire chapters of history rewritten. I looked toward Adrian. Someone was trying to erase my mother. He slowly shook his head. That is what I believed for many years. He stepped closer to the library window where rain continued sliding down the glass in silver lines. But I was wrong. I waited. Your mother left enough evidence behind to be remembered. The journal. The rings. The chapel. The letters. He turned back toward me, his eyes steady. Those were not the actions of someone whose memory disappeared. They were the actions of someone protecting another person. My heartbeat quickened. Me. Yes. Silence settled between us until the truth finally revealed itself. Claire, Adrian said softly, you were never hidden because people wanted to erase Evelyn Carter. His next words seemed to stop time itself. You were hidden because someone wanted to erase Claire Evelyn Carter. I felt the room sway beneath me. Every missing record. Every altered document. Every anonymous message. Every unanswered question suddenly aligned into one impossible answer. It had never been my mother's identity they feared. It had been mine. My knees weakened, and I slowly lowered myself into the chair beside the fireplace. Why? I whispered. I was only a child. Samuel walked to one of the bookshelves and carefully removed a small locked wooden box. He placed it gently on the table before us. Because of this. Adrian unlocked the box with a key he wore around his neck beneath his shirt. Inside rested several legal documents wrapped in protective sleeves, along with an old brass key and a sealed envelope bearing Evelyn's handwriting. Adrian opened the first document and quietly slid it toward me. It was a family trust dated more than 20 years earlier. My eyes moved across the first page before stopping on a single paragraph highlighted in blue ink. Upon the confirmed identity of Claire Evelyn Carter, sole beneficiary, all protected archives, charitable foundations, family properties, and historical evidence entrusted to the Carter legacy shall immediately transfer into her legal custody. I looked up in stunned silence. Adrian continued. The financial inheritance is significant, but that is not what frightened people. He rested his hand on the remaining documents. These archives contain decades of correspondence, financial records, and sworn statements collected by your mother and your father. They reveal the truth behind events powerful people spent years trying to bury beneath silence. I stared at the sealed envelope that still remained unopened inside the box. Across the front, Evelyn had written only one sentence. For my daughter. Open only after you know who you are. Before either of us reached for it, the grandfather clock in the corner struck 7. At the exact same moment, the security monitor mounted beside the library door chimed softly. Adrian looked toward the screen. A single vehicle had stopped outside the estate gates. The driver stepped into the rain carrying nothing except a white envelope. When the camera zoomed closer, my breath caught. The envelope was addressed in the same elegant handwriting I had already begun to recognize. It simply read, "Deliver this to Claire. She is finally ready." Rain shimmered beneath the estate lights as the security gate slowly opened. No one inside the vehicle attempted to enter. The elderly driver stepped out alone, walked to the call box, placed the white envelope carefully inside the weatherproof compartment, and returned to his car without once looking toward the house. 30 seconds later, he drove away, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as he had arrived. Adrian retrieved the envelope himself. He examined the handwriting for a long moment before placing it gently into my hands. It is hers, he whispered. The same handwriting from the journal. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single page, folded with extraordinary care, and a pressed white gardenia whose fragrance had somehow survived the years. The letter was short. My dearest Claire, if these words have reached you, then you have already discovered the truth that mattered most. You were never abandoned. You were never forgotten. Every silence around your life was built out of love, not shame. There will always be people who measure power by what they can erase. Do not become one of them. Remember instead that names can be hidden, records can disappear, photographs can be altered, but kindness leaves evidence that no one can destroy. If you are reading this beside Adrian, then he kept the promise I asked of him long ago. He gave you the greatest gift anyone can offer another person. The chance to choose your own future before your past found you. Live boldly. Love freely. And never allow fear to write your story again. I lowered the letter slowly. The room remained completely still. For the first time since the anonymous crate had arrived at my studio, I felt something stronger than confusion. I felt peace. Not because every question had been answered, but because I finally understood that my life had never been empty. It had been protected until I was ready to carry it. I walked toward the portrait above the fireplace. The woman smiling from the canvas no longer looked like a stranger. She looked like home. My fingertips rested lightly against the silver compass pendant hanging around my own neck. I remember enough, I whispered. The rest can come when it is ready. Adrian stood a respectful distance behind me. He had spent 20 years carrying promises that were never truly his, yet he had never broken a single one. I turned to face him. Thank you, I said. The words felt too small for everything they contained. He smiled gently. Your mother once told me that courage is not refusing to cry. It is choosing to keep walking after the tears stop. We stepped outside together as the rain finally gave way to clear skies. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a sky filled with quiet stars reflected across the Hudson River below. The future waiting beyond the estate gates no longer frightened me. My records could be restored. My true name could be reclaimed. The Carter archives could finally be preserved instead of hidden. But those things were no longer the most important part of my story. I had spent years believing identity lived inside documents, signatures, and official records. I knew better now. Identity lived inside every promise that survived when the world expected it to disappear. I looked once more at the compass pendant resting against my heart before smiling toward the horizon. They had erased my name from every file they could find. They had hidden my past behind silence and missing pages. Yet the one thing they never understood was that love remembers what history forgets, and sometimes the strongest legacy is not the one written in ink, but the one quietly carried home by the person who was always meant to find it.